Awesome.
Welcome, Gloria. Welcome.
Thank you, Adarsh, for having me on your live chat.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So, just going to reiterate for everyone who's here, I'm talking today, I'm in conversation with Gloria Benny. Gloria Benny is the co-founder of Make a Difference, which goes by the acronym MAD, and also Guardians of Dreams, which is what she's working on actively now. And I have known Gloria since 2007-ish, I think, when we around the same time when she worked at Google, and I got to know all the amazing work that she had started and all the work that she's doing right now. So it's been wonderful to reconnect as well and catch up on the stuff that she's doing over the past couple of days. And it's an absolute privilege to have Gloria today and get to know more about her social entrepreneurship journey and a few other things that we'll get to later in the chat. So, Gloria, you started your social entrepreneurship journey at a very young age. I remember when I first met you at Google and you had just started to Make a Difference just a few years prior to that. So tell me what it's like to start and sustain a nonprofit organization.
Okay. So before I jump straight into that, I'll give you a little bit of brief about me. I come from a middle-class Malayali family. And so, I mean, large part of my life, I grew up in the privileged bubble, primarily because I grew up in Kerala. And also, most of my adolescence after that, I grew up in Saudi Arabia, which is like a typical trajectory for a lot of Malayalis to spend some time in the Gulf. And of all the countries, Saudi Arabia, which meant that your exposure to most things in life is like zero, like zilch. So when I came back to India to continue my studies and do college, that's in a lot of ways was an eye opener. I'm not very sure if I can really express it for someone who's probably not spent so much time in a country like Saudi or outside of India. So my first few years back in India is when I kind of realized that my experiences were very limited. And there are layers to society, and there are different kinds of people, people who are privileged and people who are not so privileged. And it also struck me only when I was about 18, 19 that which category I belonged to, and hence in a lot of ways the power that I held. It started off while I was in college. Actually, a couple of my friends visited a shelter home, and they came back with an idea to start a collective of students like us when we were in college, and realized that their experience of a few hours with children in shelter homes kind of unlocked ideas of how we could spend a lot more time with them and kind of provide a bridge to better opportunities for children. And I guess while I was growing up, I happened to spend a lot of time with kids because I belong to this really large family and had a little bit of, a lot of little cousins. So I loved working with children. That's something that I knew. And when this conversation came up, it was just almost like this is exactly what I was waiting for. So I kind of jumped at it, and we formed my first organization, which was Make a Difference. And it was actually when we started off a very simple idea. Maybe the simplicity is kind of probably what drove its success, and it still does. It's a very successful organization. The idea was straightforward. We knew how to speak English, and back in 2006, a lot of opportunities opened up if you knew the language. And then we spent time in shelter homes, and we noticed that children did not know the language, did not even know about the opportunities that existed. And that's kind of what the gap was that we were trying to bridge. So we ended up spending time on weekends with children. And before we knew it, this was seemed to be like a gap that we had tapped into. We didn't realize that there were so many young people across the country who was waiting for an opportunity to give and just didn't know how to. We had no idea that was the case, but the minute we started Make a Difference and we started reaching out to our friends, people would sign up. And before we knew it, in just the first 6 years, the organization grew from being just a 20 volunteer bunch in Cochin to across 23 cities in the country.
Wow.
And yeah, and we met with a lot of early success, which is fantastic for for a bunch of really young enthusiasts, because your confidence kind of really gets boosted, that you think that your idea will work.
Yeah.
And we knew we were onto something, and that was fantastic. So that's how I think my first few years of working in the space began. So none of this was planned. I think people also ask me, did you always know that you were going to be in this space? And the answer is, had no idea. The path that I charted out for myself was, I would do my bachelor's, and then I would do my MBA, and then work in a company and be financially independent, and that was it. Right? So much so that, in a lot of ways, when I was in college, cracking CAT was my end goal. And
Right.
little did I know this is where I would be. So I guess in some ways, that's kind of how it started.
You chose to start.
In a lot of ways,
Yeah.
destiny. And for 13 years down the lane, here I am, quite entrenched in the space, thoroughly enjoying working on the problem, right? And I guess in some ways, the fact that I got the opportunity to really experience, what life was for a child living in a shelter home, because my team and we used to spend hours teaching children in shelters. So that gave us an opportunity to kind of look under the hood. And that really was the reason that I think I'm still in the space, and I'm still holding on to the fact that this problem can be solved. And also, I'll probably get into that in a little bit. But once you kind of see some of these things, it's really difficult to unsee them. And
absolutely,
I think that's really what anchored my team and I to the space. So yeah, that's how we started.
Right. So I want to pick up on that. You just ended with saying, once you see these things, you can't unsee them. So starting is one thing, but you've been in it 13 years now. What has it taken you, or how have you been able to sustain it? Because it started, like you mentioned, Make a Difference started as a very small, humble outfit. You had no ideas, as no context for what it would become eventually, even within a short time space. And then now you're working with Guardians and Dreams, working with children in shelter homes, and facilitating a better life and education for them. So what does it take to go from the starting and the energy with that to keep it going, for 13 years? What have you discovered, and what's the journey been like?
Yeah, so I think, like starting and sustaining are two different things. Starting often is usually based on energy, and you kind of just have a team of people who would just build up the momentum, and it's a lot of excitement, and you feel like you could conquer the world. And just like most other things in life, that phase also comes to an end. And there was such a phase when in my life where after about probably 2011, 2012, that was the time I was still working in Google. And there was a personal experience of trying to support or rescue a child that had run away from a shelter home. And then we tried to trace the child across the different shelters that the child was had to go to. And I'd say it was a turning point in my life, because it opened up various layers to the systemic challenges with the childcare space. Apologies if I'm getting technical. Right?
No, you aren't. Go on. Yeah.
So, and to be honest, up until then, we knew that we were really making a difference, and this was what we were doing was supremely impactful. But this just one experience of following a child who had somehow gotten out of a shelter home, and the kind of experiences the child had to go through, the fact that he was lost. So, the police had picked him up. He was put in a government home where he was again, the care experiences aren't the best. And then him coming back to us, and how he was before, and what happened to him after, were in a lot of ways what was really opened my eyes to the fact that the problems that our country face with respect to quality childcare was much deeper. And that's when I think, in a lot of ways, internally, it was important, I think, for me personally to rethink the approach that we had to solving the problem. And that's when Guardians of Dreams was started. So, and by then I was 30, which meant that setting up and restarting an organization at 30 was very different from doing it when you're 19. And it took a completely different kind of grit and resilience. It was scary. The kind of expectations that you have of life when you're 30 is different from, where you are at 19. So
Yes.
Starting up all over again at 30 was a completely different experience. And sustaining, I think, I'm not very sure if there's a formula to it. It is a combination of the people you have around you. Like in my case, I think I was blessed with people who really cared about the cause, and them joining in and saying that, you know what, hey, let's give this another shot, and let's try and look at the systemic issues in this space. And even if it means that we have to go back to the drawing board, increase the landscape and the canvas, and we start from scratch again. That was kind of really what I think got me to start again. And even to this day, the different decisions that we take when it comes to sustaining the organization, we've had a lot of tough years, right?
Yeah.
And I think if I had to distill it down to an ingredient of sustaining an organization, I think the primary ingredient would be the people and the team that you have, and that includes your peers and
Absolutely.
the mentors and advisors who kind of say, you know what, we have your back. We know that you're going through a tough year, but hey, this too will pass. So sustaining an organization in a lot of ways is the people. Yeah.
I can relate to that. Thanks. And thanks for putting in perspective your very different social entrepreneurship journeys. The first one is Make a Difference, and the second one with Gardens and Dreams, and the different circumstances and what it took for you to start and sustain in both contexts. I think that was very helpful for me to understand exactly how your own journey has evolved over the years and the various things you had to consider. Talking about you specifically as a social entrepreneur, what specific problems are you trying to solve?
Okay, so I'm going to just basically try and explain this a little bit. So firstly, India is a very young country, which means that we have 40% of our population is below the age of 18, right?
Sorry,
and
sorry, you just cut off for a minute. So I didn't hear what you said. 40% of our population is below the age of
18.
18, all right.
And that's a huge asset, and that really fuels our work, fuels the country, fuels the economy. But there is one component of that is really what my team and I focused on, which is that 40% of our child population are actually vulnerable. That means that there are 2 crore children who are vulnerable in the sense that they either are in families that are unable to take care of them, or they are being trafficked for child labor or multiple other reasons, that including flesh trafficking. There are children who are growing up in environments that are violent, and there are children who are growing up in environments that are subpar. And for a country like India, what that means is that, you know this, you have children. The kind of inputs that a child gets during the first 18 years, in fact, I say in the first 10 to 12 years, has significant impact on how productive and how contributing an adult you can possibly be.
Yes.
And the fact that there were 2 crore such children, and 2 crore such children that are outside of family care, right, meant that it kind of drove me to look at, okay, so what does our country have for such children who are outside of family care? Almost everyone that I know, including myself, we've all grown up in safe families. So it's like the underbelly society that we don't really see.
Yeah.
Because how many of us have friends who have not grown up in a family care? How many of us have friends who've grown up in a shelter home? right? And that's kind of like what the privilege bubble I'm talking about. I still don't know enough people in that category. So what that means is that one, we have a blind spot to the problem. And the fact that the first decade of my work in this space really allowed us to look under the hood. And what we saw wasn't very pretty. What we saw was that first, that just to kind of give you the details of the problem, is that if you're a child that's outside of family care, typically the system is that you will get support from the state to grow up in a shelter home, which will protect and keep you safe. And then there are multiple ways that you can be supported. One is you could be adopted, right? Second, actually, before that would be that they would do an investigation, a background of your family, if you have any. And if they find that you still can go back to them, then you are repatriated. So that's one channel. The second is that if you are, if you could be put up for adoption, and if you find an adoptive family, then you would grow up in a family that you can go up for adoption. The third, there is a foster care system in India, though very nascent. We do have foster care system. And then the fourth is that you would grow up in a shelter home or an orphanage. We often know it as an orphanage, where you will grow up with multiple other children until you're 18, and that's when you pass out of that shelter and reintegrate into society. Now, what I noticed was that the quality of care that orphanages and shelter homes are able to provide was extremely, is very subpar. I mean, just the litmus test is, would I want to grow up in that environment? No. The first decade of my work in the space kind of showed that it didn't matter in which part of the country this shelter home was in. It could be in from Kerala to Dehradun to Kolkata to Ahmedabad. We saw that a ton of these shelter homes were actually struggling with multiple layers of issues, which is that they did not have sufficient resources, they did not have the expertise, possibly. They worked in these fragmented silos that the society was blinded to. And all our interaction with these shelters would be, hey, it's my birthday, so I'm going to go and celebrate. But little do you know that do children in shelters get to celebrate their birthdays? Do they even know when their birthday is? Often we don't, quite think twice about the fact that what it means for those children that you go and cut your cake there. Or let's say I have, old clothes to donate. And the first thing that you think of is, hey, I could donate to a shelter home. But often when you walk into a shelter, you notice that a lot of the children kind of walk around in, clothes that are bigger than them. And that's because they often only get hand-me-downs, and they often get only secondhand used clothes. And what does that mean for a child that's growing up, in a shelter? And I could go on about this, but several aspects, like us as when we go into a shelter, we kind of expect the children to kind of stand up and say hi and be happy and chirpy, but children don't particularly want to do that. And so, what are you teaching them? Are you teaching them to be showpieces for people who come in and donate to support your shelter, or do you want them to grow up with really owning their identity and having a balanced and a constructive self-image?
Self-worth.
So those are some of the self-worth, exactly, and those are some of the stark issues that we saw with the system. And it's also because the system is just overburdened, right? We're a country with a huge population, and a large portion of them being children, and with very little resources, and often these challenges are not very apparent to the eye, and that's kind of what Guardians of Dreams is trying to solve. It's a really, really, really long way. We've just about started, but the idea is to kind of put the word out that, hey, why can't shelter homes be as good as the boarding schools that you and I would have gone to? Why can't they? Why aren't we reimagining the quality of shelters? Is that just because they don't really have adults or parents to voice on behalf of their own children? And that's kind of what I think Guardians is trying to do. We're trying to be their voice.
Thanks so much for that answer. And we have a contextual question from Trovecraft India, Many asks, do you think India's lack of population control is adding to this problem? I say lack of because I don't see any effective initiatives being taken to keep that in check.
Well, I'd have to probably give my personal opinion on this. I guess, yeah, I mean, India really does have a population issue. Should we go down the route of population control? As somebody who works in the space of childcare, where I see that there are tons of children who need support. Yes, I'd say why not adopt? Why not take in children and care for them? Why not start a foster care? Is it time for us to rethink the way that we do family planning? Possibly, but I'm not the expert on this. These are just my personal views, but I would vouch for the fact I would, if I had a choice, say that we should adopt more. We should rethink the way that we are looking at our own country's children. Yeah.
All right. And you mentioned a lot of important statistics and data and things that I personally have not thought about. For instance, I never knew that we have a foster care support system in India. And I always assumed personally that people who don't have parents end up either in an orphanage or on the streets. So that was nice to know. And I also didn't know that people get repatriated to their homes. So that's something I didn't know actually happened actively. So that's good to know. Yeah. But in all this you mentioned, I think you've immersed yourself in social entrepreneurship ever since you were 19, and it's been several years since then. And I'm assuming that many of your days go by thinking about everyone else's problems and the choices and decisions you have to make for other people, or your shelter homes or your teams. But if you had to think about yourself and talking about you, what are some of the tough choices you've had to make?
Interesting. I guess, yeah, I mean, I think I have personally met with a lot of folks in life on the road. We all do, and I'll probably talk about a couple of mine. One definitely was the decision to transition out of a company like Google and move full time into the social sector. While I was, super excited about it because, what I was moving into was my own organization and was something that I was really, really passionate about. The choice was tough because very few people around me understood why for such a decision, to the extent that my parents probably still don't get it. When the move happened, they thought it was just going to be a phase and that she'll grow out of it. Right. And it's only now slowly that it's dawning on them that, hey, it looks like she's going to stay in this space. So one part of it was, yes, trying to get people who are closest to me to understand. And it is tough because in their generation, being in the social space meant that you would renounce everything in life and you would just, wear a kurta and, take off and lead a life of a yogi of sorts, right? But social entrepreneurship in the new age isn't that. It isn't so much. It's transformed. And anyway, the decision was tough. In fact, I will narrate a story about how, and also the months after that of how much of difference of the two worlds is, because while I was in Google, I had the opportunity to travel to Dublin actually on one of my projects. And when I was at the airport, right, the minute I said that, I was, this is an official visit, and then the lady who was checking me and said that, hey, listen, there's a business class seat that's free. Why don't you just upgrade yourself? I was like, oh, cool. I get to travel business class. And that was great. And it was a wonderful experience. And then after I had moved into the social space, and then I started working full time with a nonprofit with Matt, actually, we had the opportunity to travel to Malaysia for something that was very crucial for the organization, very crucial to the design. But then we were at the check-in counter. The guy, we started talking to the guy who was checking us in, and he was like, oh, what do you guys do? And we were like, we work with a nonprofit. And then he paused, and then he's like, why are you taking a flight out? Why are you traveling to Malaysia? And we were like, this is a very important visit, and it's crucial for organization growth. And his conversation were like, how many children you could feed with that ticket, the cost of that ticket. And for me, that was a big difference in the response. And I felt that that what I was doing was possibly life-changing for a lot of children in my new role, but the difference was really stark, and it continues to be, and that's you kind of get used to that of working in this space. And I guess the difference I can see, because you would relate to this, when you say, while you're working in Google, you tell somebody, hey, I work in Google, and they're like, oh, okay, you kind of already graded and judged and put on a pedestal, I guess, to some degree. But now when I say I work with a nonprofit, often people are like, okay, so, but what do you do full time, right? How do you support yourself? And I'm like, this is what I do full time, and this is how I support myself, and it's tough to explain. So that was definitely interesting. Was difficult in the beginning, but was something that I think understand and embrace now. That would be one. And yeah, I mean, and I think the different shades of that would be financial constraints that come with it, societal acceptance. If that means a lot to you, then that would get to you as well over the years. So that was one tough choice. And I think the second really tough choice was starting over at 30, right? That wasn't easy. Having spent 10 to 12 years in this space, and then deciding to completely go back to the drawing board and look at the problem in a slightly higher systemic fashion, was tough, because that was a time when if you've started and then you're moving out to a different started up once, and then you've moved on to having the option to go back to the for-profit space or start over again, etc., then that's another fork where you have to really choose. And I kind of found that as I think an inflection point where I had to kind of really ask myself again, I'm going to give this another shot. And do I still want to stay in the social sector? Do I still believe that I have a shot at making a small dent in the problem at least? And I think in some ways it was a recommitment to the cause and a recommitment to the impact. And that was another tough choice. But yeah.
Right. But I think Gayatri Pushparaj asked a little earlier, how do you balance work and personal life? And I'm asking this question because it's in the context of the question I just asked you. So what's it like balancing work and a personal life, especially when everything or most things you do are not about yourself? So
okay, so if any of my colleagues are watching this, they would most possibly be face palming, because that's the worst question. I'm not very sure I'm great at balancing my personal and professional life. In fact, I think we eventually figure out, because both work and personal life, it's interdependent. So, but in my case, I guess I've had to. I mean, I've chosen to design my life around my work. When I say my work, it's not just the organization; it is the larger, the larger cause and the larger impact that we're trying to drive. And I know for a fact that for me, our work is going to take a long time. It might, it might be a lifetime's worth of work. Because for us to see, because of the cost, because of the issue that we picked, which is childcare, to really know impact, it takes a child to complete that 18-year life cycle. 18 years space, right? So really, for you to know if you've really made a difference. And that is one cycle. So it's then when you can, iterate and learn the next round. So, I kind of know this is a 50, 60-year journey. And so that meant that I had to design my life around it, which for me looked like, one question was, is it possible for me to have a family of my own at the same time, dedicate enough time that this course required? And I have chosen, at least for the time being, not to make a family of my own. The second question that usually people ask, and I've asked myself, is, do I want to have a child as well, right? And I guess in some ways, maybe wanting to make a stance on the issue. For now, I would say no. because there are, and the reason being that, I guess it's because, the layers of commitment and for you to be able to raise a child, that you've done your 100% with is quite a bit. So the fact that I have to spend significant time on my work, didn't want to just I didn't think I would be able to do justice to both. So I think this whole personal and professional life is each of our own individual, how imagination is left to our imagination of how we want our life to
how
be
you
and
imagine
what
it.
we want. Exactly, and what are your priorities and what would make you happy
Absolutely.
at the end of the day, and each of us would have our own way of defining it, and this is how I've worked that out.
Thanks, and thanks for articulating the commitment it takes, because it's easy to throw money at a problem. It's easy to start something and stop it, but when you put it in the context of a child's life, like you mentioned so well a few minutes ago, in the context of a child's life, or just a person's life, from when they are a child to when they become an adult, that is a considerable time investment to see them, be able to achieve bigger things through your interventions and through what Guardians of Dreams is doing, through what Make a Difference is doing as well. So thanks for putting that in perspective, because I think very, very often we lose sight of how much it really takes to make a difference. And very often it's not just a small one-time fix, or it's not just, throwing money at a problem. It takes a lot more than that to move the needle.
Exactly.
Interesting question from Trovecraft India. Do you get emotionally invested with the children you work with? I'll let you answer that, but I think you were saying something before I asked the question. So I'll let you say what you were saying, and then we can jump to the question.
Oh, I was just going to say that yes, it does take a lot of time to take care of our children, and I just want to take this time to call out the people who are actually running these shelter homes and orphanages and childcare institutions, and for them, this is what they've dedicated their lives to, and they're the ones who really invest time in directly working with children, and that's a lifetime dedication that I don't think I have dedicated to that degree. It's probably of a different nature, but the people that we don't always see, but there are tons of them out there, and they've really, really committed to taking care of vulnerable children.
Right.
And okay, so do I get emotionally invested in the children that I work with? I think I do, especially stories and so if you, it's very difficult not to, because children are children, and the stories that you hear, especially in the space that I'm working in, are actually is it's really tough. It's difficult. You don't want to hear it. You want to wish it away, but it actually sticks to the point where I think my team and my team will also agree. We do have occasionally meltdowns, right? Of the fact that when you've dedicated your life to this and then you see problems that are so stark right now, and you know that it's going to take 20-30 years to really fix it, so you cannot chase that one story right now. You've got to just let it be, or one, like, you're not going to be able to solve everything. You've got to let it be, and you've got to pull yourself back and look at the big picture. It takes a lot of I think work on yourself to be able to do that. For example, just a narration would be that I'm sure we would have all seen children at traffic signals. If you live in a city, you would most probably have seen it. And typically, what you need to do when you see children begging or selling is that you do need to call the child line number, which is 1098. That is 1098. Right? And that's what anyone can do or needs to do, because children below the age of 14 should not be working. They should be in school. And my team and I have tried a couple of times to call the line and get children off the streets. And we've seen upfront how overburdened the system is, right from the line being busy to them not being able to send somebody to rescue the child, to even if the child gets rescued, there are people who would come in who would say that they're the parent, So they try and work around the loophole in the legal system, etc. And eventually you will just see the child back in the traffic signal just from the next day. And multiple times we've had breakdowns where we're like, you know what, shouldn't we go after that? Shouldn't we get that child off the streets? And I'm talking about 5, 6, 7-year-olds, right? And yes, we do get invested in the children, but then I think I just kind of like have a meltdown and then just, kind of get up, brush it off and say, this is a longer journey. And we're hoping that in the next 40, 50 years, we don't see any child on the street. And yeah, just keep the eye on the ball.
Right. Thanks. We have about 10 minutes for questions, and I see some questions over here. But if you've not sent a question already, I'd encourage you to type your question out now, and I will ask a few of these questions. So Sharon asks, has COVID-19 caused a rise in calls? And I'd also like you to put that in perspective in the context of what the typical needs would be at Guardians of Dreams for someone who wants to support, anyone here who's watching who wants to be of assistance and wants to help in some way. What can we do to help? And especially given what COVID-19 is like and the effect it has on every single industry and on every single person we know. In that context as well, has it caused a rise in calls, and how can people like us watching today help?
Great. One, thank you for asking. And I think we all know that the COVID-19 it's probably one of the biggest problems that the globe has ever faced, at least in our lifetime. So with this kind of crisis, the first thing that goes out is philanthropy, right? So in a lot of ways, the development sector is going to be struggling over the next 2 years. And what that means is that some of the smaller nonprofits are the ones who are going to be struggling the most, because their support used to come from the community around them. And when I say smaller nonprofits, I'm actually referring to the shelter homes and orphanages that keep our children. They are small nonprofits who actually now since actually the last week of March, when the lockdown was in India, we did a outreach to call all of our 225 childcare institutions in our network. And one of the things that we noticed was that they depended heavily on walk-in donors, which meant that donors would walk in with bags of rice, with books, with school bags, with medicines, etc. And that's how a huge part of their cost was covered. And the remaining would be people, it's called Annadanam, where people just kind of come in and celebrate their birthdays or other life events, and they sponsor children's meals. Now with the lockdown and with the crisis, that's completely been wiped out, and it's become zero, which means that liquidity is, so they completely, there's basically a liquidity crunch. And they have, some of the stories are scary. There are homes with like 20, 30 children and 3,000 in their bank, right? And they don't know how they're going to figure out and what are the sources, because the capability is not always like of a large NGO. They often don't even have a website. They have no way to reach out to the larger community. So what we are doing at Guardians of Dreams is that we have set up a fund, a COVID relief fund, where we're identifying childcare institutions and shelter homes that are in this category that are really going to struggle over the next 3 to 6 months. And we're basically giving financial aid to them to make sure that they survive the peak of this crisis. And I'll tell you why the survival is crucial. Because all predictions say that families are going to slip into poverty, right? The minute families slip into poverty, the first thing that a caring parent would want to do is make sure that my child is in a safe space, will continue to go to school, and will get 3 meals a day. And that safe space is a childcare institution, is a shelter home. So we think that there's going to be a higher requirement for these institutions to be able to take in children, at least for a short period of time, until families find their footing and they're able to get back to the jobs. And if these shelter homes do not survive, children are going to end up on the streets, they're going to start working, they're going to be abused, the vulnerability is going to increase, and we're going to have a generation of children who's going to have their childhood robbed from them. And it's important that we stop that, or at least we try and reduce the number of children who were kind of hit by this crisis in that manner.
Right.
So
and
folks want to support, we've set up a fundraiser on this on Millup, which is a crowdfunding campaign page, and could go and support.
Yes,
Really.
and I also love the verb in their website. So it's Guardians of Dreams, but the website is Go Dreams. So it's like Go Dreams. It's like almost being a cheerleader. So I love that. And Go Dreams indeed. If you want to contribute, obviously there is the Millup fundraiser, or there also is a website for more information and ways to help and take action as well. It's not just information. And we have time for one last question, Gloria. And I'd like you to answer almost like a double-headed question. So there was someone earlier, I don't remember the name, who asked a question on how much bureaucracy do you have to deal with? Let me try and find that. Yeah, how much of a barrier has bureaucracy been in the journey? So that's what Daphne asked a while earlier. And there also is a more recent question about what is like your take on the gray areas in child labor, such as the definition of hazardous industries, family business, or establishments. What, according to you, are the possible solutions? So because there is some overlap between that and bureaucracy, I've asked you to add that element as well. And there is one last question, which is, there are more questions, but yeah, just ask this question for now, and we'll see if you have more time.
Okay. So with bureaucracy, I think my experience with working with the government machinery is limited, and that is by choice. So I'm going to restrict my answer to just what I know. Right. It is by choice because for us in Guardians, we believe that for us to be able to effectively work with a larger machinery, we need to be effectively delivering impact first, and be able to have a delivery mechanism that is of a scale that can actually complement the government system. Right. So at the moment, Guardians of Dreams do not work a lot with the government system. We are mostly, we're in the commons in similar circles. So I haven't directly faced bottlenecks or challenges, but I do hear that it is a challenge. But the challenge is primarily because of the way the system is designed. The scale in which the government operates and the scrutiny that they have to face from the public, they have to design the system that will be defendable to such scrutiny, which means that there are going to be a ton of processes before you can get any kind of budget or money released, etc. There are people who do not want to put their their career on the line for certain things because you do get scrutinized for every action that you take. So I guess because I see both sides, it's not a very simplistic response, but would want to vouch for the fact that people in the system also want to do stuff, but they're confined to the restrictions of the system. And the best time to work with the government in the system is when the organization, or even with Guardians of Dreams, we have built the machinery to deliver impact at scale, and then be able to plug ourselves into the larger system so that we become the delivery machinery for the government. Because at the end of the day, for scale and for larger impact, the government system is the way to go. But yeah, just on bureaucracy, that's what I would say. It's just the way the system is designed. And about child labor, what are the gray areas? Okay, so just to kind of talk about the laws. So in India, if you're a boy child, you can work from the time you're 14, and if you're a girl child, you can work from the time you're 16, right? So what that also means is that the law does protect you as a child from being pulled into child labor at a very young age, but it still happens. In a lot of the industries where children come with advantages, which means either their tiny fingers are useful in the work that's required to be done, or they're cheap labor because you don't have to pay them, because you just have to give them 3 meals and a place to stay and they're okay. Yeah. I don't buy into the gray areas of child labor. I think child labor has to be 100% eradicated. There is no excuse for getting a child to work in your business if the child is only 14 or below 16. The child needs to be in school. I think that the clause of family business in the law could actually lead to more organizations and more businesses using children There are a ton of organizations that are specifically in this space doing fantastic work to ensure that this kind of abuse doesn't happen. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much. And to the person who asked the question, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but Gloria did mention that you can call 1098 to report unauthorized child labor. If you see someone who looks like they're under the age of 14, either boy or girl in this case, please do call that number and encourage or request the authorities to take action. Before we end, I just want to say that there have been several call-outs for all the amazing work you're doing. I myself want to say you're doing a fantastic job, Gloria. I love to see all the work that you're doing with Guardians of Dreams. There also is Sharon, who said, so great to see how much you've accomplished. There is a common friend and one of your old teammates at MAD, Kritika, who says, kudos to everything Guardians has been doing, especially during the COVID situation. Very proud. Akshay says, wow, this sounds great. Your team must be exceptional. Sona says, Guardians is just doing amazing. What they're doing is phenomenal. So want to encourage you with all these people, with all these comments, because there are people who look up to the work that you're doing and who stand by all that you're doing. So keep at it. And wishing you all the very best.
Which is why he
Fantastic,
said
Akshay.
Yeah.
Good job. Good job, Akshay. Yeah, and once again, you can look up the Milap fundraiser for those of you that want to help tangibly. I think the name of the fundraiser, if I remember right, is Support Gloria on Milap. So you can look that up. And you can also look up godreams.org and follow Gloria on social media as well. She's here on Instagram. Take a look at the website. Lastly, this talk, for those of you who missed some part of this talk and joined late, this will be in IGTV subsequently in a couple of days from now. It'll also be on YouTube. So take a look at it and go back and listen to all the amazing stuff that Gloria has shared from her journey so openly and candidly today. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gloria. Thanks so much for taking the time. And I wish you all the very best. Sending much love and regards from you and your team. Thank
you so much. This was an absolute pleasure. Thanks a ton, Adarsh.
Likewise. Everyone who's here, thanks for being here as well. This will be in IGTV again sometime soon, so you can take a look at anything you may have missed. But until then, be well and goodbye. Good night.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.